So this is coming along nicely, but I'd like to add some additional things to it. One of the things that you often have to do when you're filling out a user registration form is enter your address. And sometimes your physical address and your mailing address are different things. So what I'd like to do this time is work on conditional formatting and improve our checkbox a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll add something right here between favorite color and agreeing to the terms and conditions. I'll add a few fields for your basic address, and then I'll have a checkbox underneath it that says mailing address is the same, and by default it will be checked. And if it's unchecked, then we'll unhide or we'll show some additional fields for the mailing address. Okay? So let's get started. So we'll go over to our code, and the very first thing I'm going to have to do is I want that checkbox to show up, and I want it to show up checked. So if we look under Forms.js, one of the things we should probably do here is add a property that's called checked, like that. C-H-E-C-K-E-D. There, I got it eventually. And then, of course, we want to add that to the input. So, right here, I'll bind checked to checked, the property. Now we can specify that. And if we specify something, it will be checked. And if we leave it out, it will be unchecked by default. Okay? So now that we've improved our input a little bit, let's go over to our registration form.js, and we'll add some data to this because we want to be able to control what is and is not checked. So I'll just add some data. I'll give it a data function. And by default, that will simply return, and we'll give it one field, address, same, checked. And we'll make that true by default, okay? We're going to need that property or that data before too long. Now let's just come down here and add the address. So I'll put it, as I said, after favorite color, but before our little agree to terms and conditions. So I'll just copy this one and modify it as necessary. So we'll copy this and paste it right here and duplicate it once for address, city, state or province, and zip. And it doesn't really matter what it is, but we may as well do this just so it'll make sense to us when we look at it. So address, and then city, town, and then state, province, which I know is North American specific, but I am in North America. So state, province, and then zipper postal. And you can put whatever you want here. And we'll give these the appropriate things, otherwise our IDs will clash. So we'll call this one zip. This one, I'm in Canada, so I'll call it province. And city. And that's sufficient for that. And the last one, of course, is address. Okay, so we'll have that. There's our information. Now I want a checkbox, so I'll just duplicate that one. And I'm going to change the label to mailing address same. Okay? And I don't want it to be required because you should be able to uncheck this. And if you look at the documentation for Vue, let me see if I can find that really quickly. Right here, form input bindings. And of course, this is right in the Getting Started guide for version 3 of Vue. If you come down here to basic usage, the very first thing they give you is a note. Note, vModel. We're going to be using vModel to bind our check value to a piece of data so we can work with it. It will ignore the initial value, checked, or selected attributes found on any form elements. Okay, that means we need to actually come back here and give this an initial checked value. Okay, so I'll just put in here checked equals true. We're passing along that value to make sure it's checked initially. Okay, and the other thing I want to do here is to use the vModel on this. So we're going to bind this vModel, which I have to spell right, is equal to, and I'm going to use that address same checked that I have up in the data field, right up here. Okay, so we're returning this data, and this is now bound to that value. And that's pretty good. But what I want to have happen, of course, is I want 4 more fields like this for mailing address down here. So let's just do that right now. Get these in here. And I want these hidden initially. So I'll just paste those in. And in a minute I'll hide them. Right now we'll just call this mailing address. So I'll put the word mailing in front of all these things like that, copy, and then I'll just paste and paste and paste, and I'll just change the name so I'm putting 2 after them. And of course these are not required because your address might be the same by default. So we'll just get rid of the required attribute here. Now I want these 4 fields to be hidden until this is unchecked. And I can do that really easily by wrapping all of these in a div and putting another directive in there, another view directive, v-if. And this is conditional rendering. And we're going to simply say that's equal to, and here I need to have some evaluation or some JavaScript that evaluates to true or false. So what I'm going to check for is address same checked is exactly equal to false. Okay? And then down here, I'm going to wrap or put my closing div here. And just to make things look a little more attractive, I'll put one more div in here with a class equal to, say, MT3, margin top 3. Otherwise, it's going to be jammed right up against the checkbox. Div. Okay. So let's tab all of this in one, and then tab all of these in one, just so it's more readable. Now the last thing I'll want is some kind of method that fires when this value, this checkbox for mailing address the same, when that changes. So all I have to do here is the same thing we did before. Give it a v-on attribute and make that colon, make that bound to a click. When someone clicks on this, it's going to change the checkbox. And then we'll call a method that doesn't exist yet, and we'll go write it in a minute. And I'll call the method address same. So that means I need to come down here and give this thing some methods, okay? So I'll methods, colon, and then in curly brackets, and then add this comma so it's syntactically correct, and I'll define one method, address same. And right now we won't make it do anything except write to the console, so we can see what's going on. So right away I'll say console.log address same fired, just so we know when it fires. And then we'll have a little if statement here. If, and I'll say if this dot address same checked, if that's exactly equal to true, then we'll say console.log was checked on click. Okay. And down here, we'll just say else console.log was not checked on click. Okay. Now, let's try this out and see how it looks. So I'm going to stop my listener, and then I'll switch over to registration.html, and I'll start my live server. And that should fire up a new window. And there it is. Now let's open our console so we can see what's going on. Everything's checked at the start, so that's good. Or this is checked at the start. Now when I click on this, I should get something in the console. Address same fired was checked on click. Perfect. Now let's click it and check it. Address same fired was checked on click. Well, that's a bit of a problem. Something didn't quite work the way that it should. So let's go back here and see what happened. I think that's actually doing exactly what we told it rather than what we want it to do. And I think it's because here in this method, we need to actually change the value of address same clicked. Okay? So when it is clicked and it is true, in other words, when it was checked on the click, as this says, what do we want to do? Well, we actually want to say this dot address same checked is now equal to false. Okay? And down here, we want to say this dot address same checked is now equal to true. When it was unchecked, we want to make the address same checked equal to true. So that should actually do it for us. So far, let's go back and have a look, see what happens. So I'll clear the console, and I'll uncheck this, and look, it unhid this for us and gave us the correct messages up here. And now when we click it again, it should hide it, and everything works exactly as it should. Okay, That's fairly straightforward. And now we have the ability to do conditional rendering. And it's as simple as, back here, let's have a look at this one more time. We have this logic. V if address same checked is exactly equal to false. And we can also put immediately after that a v else or a v else if. And you'll see that in the documentation right over here. And I'll post a link to this. Let's find that documentation again. Conditional rendering. Right here. So you have v if, and you can, if necessary, you can wrap multiple elements in a template that actually won't show up in the rendered HTML, which is pretty straightforward. And we also have the v else and the v else if. And there are very simple examples here. And this would work exactly as you would expect if you've ever worked with an if-else based language. And since you're working in JavaScript, clearly you have. All right, let's move on.